All right, well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me, and thank you for sticking around today, as I understand that I think most of your convention business, if not all of it, was wrapped up yesterday. But good to see you guys here this morning. This is a speech that I've given across the state to a number of different groups, conservatives, libertarians, and I wanted to start this morning with addressing one obvious question that you may have. Why is a Donald Trump supporter here speaking at the Libertarian State Convention? I have a lot of libertarian friends, and they fall on both sides of this issue. Some of them support Trump, some of them do not. But what I would just start by saying this morning is I think that this speech is about an issue that's does not matter where you stand politically, whether you're a libertarian, a Democrat, or Republican. The things that have happened over the last decade and things that we are even learning as recently as this past Friday should terrify you. If you are somebody who values individual liberty and limited government, this story should shock you and it should motivate you to keep up what you're doing here with the Libertarian Party in the state of Michigan, because it is important work and it's valuable, and freedom matters, and liberty matters, and it's easy for us to take our liberty and our freedom for granted. And how many people do you know? I know people personally that they have an attitude of, well, this is the United States of America. That could never happen here. And so with that, I'll jump into my story. So again, thank you for being here this morning. I want to thank Leah for inviting me to speak personally. It means a lot to me, and I appreciate your support. So I'm just going to start with why I went to January 6th in the first place. As somebody who's a libertarian that perhaps maybe leans a little bit more on the Republican side of politics, why did I go to January 6th in the first place? So how many of you saw the documents that were just declassified by Tulsi Gabbard on Friday about the Obama administration manufacturing Russiagate? Did any of you read that or see that? Okay. So, as somebody who had been very politically active and has continued to be politically active for the past decade, I think I, along with many of us, suspected that something was rotten in Denmark. That when Trump first got elected, I was skeptical, was not exactly a supporter of Trump, had not voted for him in the primary in 2016, but there were certainly some questions that I had about what was going on. So over this period of time of Trump's first presidency, we saw multiple impeachments, we saw investigations, basically an attempt that at least appeared to be an attempt by what we would call the deep state to undermine the duly elected president of the United States. Regardless of what party you belong to, that's something that should concern you, especially because it's being done by unelected bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. So we suspected those things were happening, that perhaps even the administration, the former administration, Obama's administration, was directly involved, but we didn't know for sure. So then we saw the election of 2020, and I still personally have questions about that election. Where did the millions of additional voters that turned out to vote in that election, where did they go? They didn't exist in 2016, and then in the last election, they didn't exist again. So there's a lot of questions there, but ultimately, to me, as a libertarian conservative, I believed that the issue was a lot more simple than even what President Trump was making it out to be, and all the talking heads in the media were making it out to be. My concern was that the Constitution of the United States in the election in 2020 was not followed. Article 1, Section 8 gives state legislatures the authority and the power to set the rules for federal elections. We all know, because our state was one of the states that did this, multiple swing states had either their governor or their secretary of state bypass their state legislature and unilaterally change their state's election laws. Those states should not have had their election results certified. That was my opinion then. It's still my opinion today, because the Constitution is supposed to be the supreme law of the land. So when I heard that Trump was having a rally in DC on January 6th to protest the election results, I thought it was my patriotic duty as a citizen of a republic to stand for what I thought to be the truth. So I traveled with some friends to Washington, DC. Little did I know how things were going to turn out that day and what the fallout from all of that would be. But what I can tell you from personal, firsthand experience is that when I first got to DC the morning of the 6th, well, I guess technically I had been there the night before, but when we got into the city in the morning of the 6th, the energy was incredible. There were Americans from all walks of life, rich, poor, Republicans, libertarians, independents, but they all had one thing in common, and that was they supported the president, and they were there to exercise their First Amendment rights, which, you know, we're supposed to have those rights, should be protected, right? There was no indication of anybody intending to commit any violence. In fact, the only people that I saw that looked like maybe they were in tactical gear were, I found out later, volunteers that were there to protect protesters in case Antifa showed up, because in a previous Trump event that had happened in DC, I think in November or December the year before, so that would have been in 2020, they did have a clash with Antifa. So everyone was there peacefully, everyone was there. It was a great morning, everybody was very excited, the energy was fantastic. And my friends and I were near the Washington Monument, kind of halfway between where Trump was speaking and the Washington Monument. We couldn't really see, we couldn't really hear what was going on. There were some TVs, and you could kind of hear Trump speaking, but it was an enormous crowd, enormous. I would say it had to be at least 1 million people, even though the media likes to say it was like 50,000. That's because they got there at 6 a.m. before everyone got there and took their photos then. But very loud, very tightly packed. So my friends and I, we like to smoke cigars, so we decided we were going to step to the side of the crowd to not inconvenience those around us and smoke a cigar and try to still listen to Trump's speech. So we made our way towards the side of the lawn where the Washington Monument is, that's nearest to the Capitol building. So as we're sitting there smoking our cigars and enjoying our time together and doing our best to listen to President Trump, there was a gentleman that was walking up and down the street on the edge of the crowd. So again, this is the side of the crowd closest to the Capitol building. And at first we didn't pay him much attention, but he was talking to people all around us, and eventually he did come up to us and my group of friends and told us that, you know, just so you know, President Trump is going to be speaking at the Capitol building next. You guys need to head there now so that you can make sure you've got good, good seats. You know, we were standing pretty much only, but encouraged us, you need to head that way now so that you can be there when President Trump speaks there next. President Trump was never scheduled to speak at the Capitol building on January 6th. That was never in the works, never planned. There were some permits that were pulled for that day for a few other speakers that were going to be speaking on the steps of the U.S. Capitol building. Well, it turns out, we found out later, that the gentleman who encouraged us to even make our way towards the Capitol building in the first place was none other than Ray Epps, which some of you may know that name. In fact, I'm going to try to keep this pretty casual this morning because it's a small group, and if you have questions or want to ask have a point of clarification or something, please feel free to jump in. But I do want to know, how many of you know who Ray Epps is? Okay, well, that's encouraging. So we made our way towards the Capitol building. partially because we also needed to find restrooms. It was unbelievable, the crowd size. And so as you can imagine, even though there were some porta johns set up at this event, I mean, the line to use those restrooms was probably over an hour. And so we just decided, you know, we can't hear Trump very well. We certainly can't see him. We can see him on a screen. If this guy, you know, knows what he's talking about and Trump's speaking at the Capitol, we can kill two birds with one stone. You know, we can go walk towards the Capitol building, use the restrooms, and also be right up front, perhaps, when Trump speaks at the Capitol building. So, we went there, made our way to the Capitol building. Interestingly enough, one of my friends that was there with me was a Marine Corps veteran, and he commented on the fact that there were almost no police officers, none, around the Capitol building when we walked that direction, probably around 11:30 or noon on that day. We ended up going a couple blocks away to find some restrooms, got some coffee, and returned to the Capitol building. And by the time we returned, the crowd was already quite large and was growing. So I won't bore you with all of the details of what did or didn't happen that day. I'm sure there's a number of opinions in this room as to exactly who was at fault for what happened that day. But what I can tell you is my intention being there that day was to exercise my First Amendment rights. I did not destroy property. I was not there to commit any acts of violence. I was there to protest an election that I had some serious concerns about. As a result of being there that day, ultimately, I was indicted on a 6-count felony indictment and also 3 misdemeanors, so 9-count indictment in total. But before I go into all of that, I'm going to back up and just kind of give you then a little bit of a timeline of what happened following the events of that day. So we returned home on January the 7th, stopped at Gettysburg. On the way back, my buddies and I were history nerds. I have a history degree. So stopped for a few hours at Gettysburg, made our way back to Michigan, and didn't think much of what had happened, except for, you know, we knew the media was, you know, trying to say this was an insurrection or something, which was the furthest thing from the truth. If you were there, you know that if those people intended to overthrow Congress, they could have. They would have, but they didn't. And nobody burned down any buildings, nobody burned any cars. The majority of the scuffles that broke out with police were after the police violated the law, and the law requires police to give 3 verbal warnings to a crowd, verbal requests to disperse before they are allowed to use explosive munitions like tear gas or rubber bullets or flashbangs on a crowd. They gave no warnings and began using explosive ammunition on a peaceful crowd up until that point. But anyway, so made our way back home, returned to work, and about 3 or 4 months later, I found out that I was on the FBI's most wanted list for January 6th. My uncle had been, for whatever reason, one of my uncles had been on the website looking at the photos because he knew I had gone, and I didn't even think I had done anything wrong. Like, I didn't think I had anything to be worried about. I wasn't checking out the list, but for whatever reason, my uncle did. And so this was about April of 2021. I found out I'm on this list. Well, as you can imagine, that's rather shocking to find your picture, no name, but just an unidentified picture that looked a lot like me, on the FBI's most wanted list. Not exactly a place I ever anticipated being. So of course I immediately contacted an attorney. And at the time I was an insurance agent, so I insured a number of law firms and spoke to an attorney that I insured and told him, I'm like, look, Brian, I don't think I did anything wrong. Shouldn't I just turn myself in and get this resolved? I mean, maybe I technically trespass, but we're talking about some misdemeanors here. Certainly, this can't be anything more serious than that. And his advice to me was, Jeremy, absolutely not. Do not turn yourself in. It does not matter what you think you did or didn't do. Number one, they are going to convict you of something. Number two, they're probably going to convict you of things far worse than you actually did. So his advice to me was keep your head down, keep working, and just try not to make any waves, and hopefully they just don't identify you and nothing comes of this. Well, that's easier said than done. It's an incredibly stressful way to live life. So I did my best for the rest of 2021. And of course, you always hearing rumors and people talking in your community. And thankfully, I didn't really hear much about me through 2021. But in January of 2022, I have a different aunt and uncle that live in Las Vegas. I found out, complicated story how I found this out, because they were calling anonymously, but found out that my aunt and uncle from Las Vegas were calling local media anonymously, leaving anonymous tips and letting them know that such and such a number or photo on the FBI's most wanted site was me, and that I was serving on the City of Midland's Planning Commission, which was true at that time. I was on the Planning Commission. I shortly after that resigned from the Planning Commission, and was again in shock. How could my own family, whether they agree with me or disagree with me, how could they turn me in? Another year goes by. Of course, I'm starting to receive calls from the media asking to do an interview or to answer questions. If I was at January 6th, and I respectfully declined and just told them I was a private citizen and I didn't do interviews with the media. Again, just mounting levels of stress and anxiety throughout this whole period of time. December of 2022, so now we're a year and a half, a little more than, almost 2 years after the event. Finally, I had 2 federal agents show up at my office. Even though my house was a block and a half down the road, they could have very easily come to my house to approach me and to ask, to interview me or to ask me to come in for questioning. But instead of doing that, they intentionally showed up at my place of work because, of course, they want to ruin your life. The process is the punishment, and intending, in my opinion, to get me fired from my job. And unfortunately, that did happen. 2 days after the agents showed up at my place of work, I was fired from my job right before Christmas. And the agents, when they got there, they just told me that they wanted to ask me questions about an ongoing investigation. They did not tell me what it was about. I didn't ask. I kind of had an idea what it might be. And I did what each of you should always do. It does not, I don't care if the FBI shows up at your doorstep and says, we think your grandma's been kidnapped. We need to ask you some questions about your grandmother or about this investigation. You do not speak to the FBI without an attorney present, period. So what I told the 2 officers, the 2 agents that came to my office was, gentlemen, I appreciate that you have a job to do, but I'm not comfortable answering any questions without my attorney present. They thanked me, gave me a business card, and asked me to have my attorney contact them. I reached out to the same attorney I had spoken with a year before and told him what had happened. He called them the very same day they showed up at my office, didn't get any answer from them, so he left them a message. 2 days later, I was fired. At the end of that week, which was Friday, my attorney called me back and said, I still have not heard back from the FBI. So we're going to send an email so that there's an actual paper trail showing that we did our best to comply with their request to contact you. So I ended up unemployed, not knowing what's going on. FBI came to my place of work, but is not responding to my attorney. So what's happening? I don't know. My dad, thankfully, had work and offered me an opportunity to work with him down south, doing commercial kitchen exhaust cleaning, or hood cleaning, some people call it, at restaurants. So I was traveling all over the South for the next 6 months, from January of 2023 through June of 2023, working with my dad, having this, hanging over my head, wondering what's going to happen. I have no idea. Literally for that entire 6 months, even though my attorney contacted them, we did not hear a single thing from the FBI until my now ex-wife called me on, I think it was June 28th of 2023, and informed me that about a dozen federal agents had just raided our house that morning, 6 a.m., pre-dawn raid, bashed in our front door, and took at the time, my two boys were 3 and 2, took them and her out of the house in their pajamas at rifle point. Why do you have to point rifles at a 2 and 3 year old, 2 and 3 year old boys? Why do you have to bash in somebody's door when the only thing I did was tell the FBI I wouldn't talk with them without my attorney present? All they had to do was contact my attorney, and I've been a law-abiding citizen my entire life. I would have happily come in and done an interview, answered questions with my attorney present. But that's not what they were about. If you recall, Merrick Garland, shortly after January 6th, had said that they were going for a shock and awe with their response to January 6th. So the intention all along was never to interview me, was never to bring me in for questioning. It was to get me fired from my job, which they succeeded in, and then make a big show of force and raid my house and endanger the lives of my children and my now ex-wife. As you know, no-knock raids are the most dangerous interaction that you can have with law enforcement. I wasn't even home when they did this. How does the FBI, if I'm truly under FBI investigation, how do they not know that I'm not home? They told my ex-wife that they didn't know I wasn't home. So either they are incredibly incompetent, highly unlikely, they're pretty competent. Either they're incompetent or they intentionally waited until I was not home to try to intimidate my family. Scary stuff. So I was asked to turn myself in Florida the following day, which of course I complied with. And I was arrested met by about a dozen FBI agents and arrested and processed. And throughout that process, just exercised my right to remain silent, wasn't answering questions. That's, again, very, very scary. When you've never broken the law in your life and you have never been arrested before, to be arrested by not just like your local city police department, but the Federal Bureau of Investigation, that's a scary thing. At one point, I do remember I was trying to keep up my spirits, if you will, and the FBI had asked me, two of the agents had asked me if I had any questions for them. And I said, yes, I do. When are you going to arrest Hunter Biden? And believe it or not, maybe it's because we were in Florida and maybe the agents down there were more sympathetic, but they did laugh. But thankfully I was released that day on a personal recognizance bond. So I was very fortunate because so many people that went through this similar experience to mine ended up spending years in jail, years in prison, some of them without trial, or maybe slightly better, but would basically be stuck with a home confinement order. So they weren't maybe in jail, but stuck at home on an ankle bracelet, being monitored. So I did not have to do any of that, which I'm grateful for. Interestingly, the warrant that the FBI served my ex-wife said that they were looking for schematics and blueprints of the United States Capitol building, as if I had somehow in advance studied the Capitol building and its design and layout and planned to go storm the Capitol on January 6th. Just utter absurdity. But that's what it said, and they found a judge who would sign off on a no-knock raid on a family that's home without their dad. Crazy. So I hired an attorney and decided we were going to fight this thing. I did not believe I was guilty of any of the charges that I had been charged with. Technically, you could probably make the case that I trespassed, but I would argue that if the First Amendment does not apply on government property, does it exist at all? So I don't think I did anything wrong. I think at worst it was an act of civil disobedience and should have been maybe a misdemeanor charge. But instead I got hit with 6 felonies and 3 misdemeanors and was looking at something in the vicinity of 4 to 6 years in prison as someone who had no criminal record whatsoever. So our strategy was essentially just delay trial as long as we could. We knew, because all of these trials were taking place in Washington, D.C., there is no such thing as an impartial jury in Washington, D.C. It's just not going to happen. I did think perhaps I had gotten lucky. You draw a judge randomly for your case, and I did draw a Trump-appointed judge. But you still don't know that that means anything. Like if someone's, it doesn't mean he's going to be sympathetic to you or be lenient with you or anything like that. But still gave me a little cause for hope. We successfully delayed trial for over a year and a half, or about a year and a half. Part of the reason we were able to do that was because the Department of Justice charged me with obstruction of Congress, which, if you recall, the Supreme Court ended up taking up a challenge to that. The statute's written in such a way that basically it's specifically targeting people who destroy or alter documents during a congressional investigation, tampering with evidence, essentially. That's what that statute was written for. It was passed after the Enron scandal, and don't know exactly how they thought that would apply to protesters on the Capitol grounds or even in the Capitol building on January 6th, but they tried to do that. So because the Supreme Court took up that case, we were able to delay my trial. I didn't end up having to go to trial until December 10th of last year. And we tried again, because now, of course, Trump has won the election. We know he's going to do something. We don't know exactly what, but it could be commutations, it could be pardons, it could be, well, the violent offenders, maybe they would get a new trial, maybe in a different jurisdiction than DC, so that they'd actually get a fair trial. But we didn't know exactly what was gonna happen. We just knew Trump had promised that he was gonna do something about J6. And so we asked the judge if he would delay my trial again until after Inauguration Day, because I still had the benefit of the presumption of innocence, because I had not actually been found guilty of anything yet. The judge refused and forced us to go through a 3-day trial. Of course, I was found guilty. And the only thing that I'm appreciative of from this judge was that the prosecution argued very hard to detain me following trial until my sentencing hearing. And the judge basically told them to go pound sand, that he was not gonna do that, and let me go home. So I was able to spend Christmas with my boys and not miss out on that special time of the year. So January 20th rolls around, President Trump gets sworn in, and as you know, he pardoned nearly 1,600 January 6th defendants. I think there were 6 commutations, but what a crazy experience. Never in a million years did I think that I would go through anything like that in life. So I wanted to spend a little bit more time today. I did this speech a little differently, talking more about the experiences and what happened that day, and then a little bit more about my trial than I normally would, because I wanted to give you guys, normally I speak in front of Republicans, I'll just be honest, but as libertarians, I wanted you to see maybe more so the abuse, I would say the abuse of power and the abuses that an out of control Department of Justice and FBI, I wanted you to see the abuse of power that took place. There was no reason to raid my home, no reason to do half of what they did, except for to intimidate, silence, and persecute political opponents. That's all that it was. And that is a scary thing. That's, again, how could that happen in the United States of America? That sounds like the Soviet Union. But what is important about this story is it's not just about me. I'm only one of 1,600 other Americans who went through very similar things. In fact, I'm one of the fortunate ones because I didn't end up actually having to go to prison. Some of those people literally spent 4 years in prison without a trial. We've all witnessed over the last 4 years, very publicly, the dangers of despots weaponizing government, weaponizing our justice system, not only against J6ers like myself, but also the current and former president, Donald Trump. And that's because they were terrified of losing their power, and I think we know now, after Tulsi Gabbard has declassified these documents, they were terrified that the Trump administration and people who actually care about the rule of law and the Constitution would find out what had been done and that they would be held accountable. But what I do know is this was not a pretty sight, what we've witnessed over the last 4 years. And it cannot be permitted to ever happen again. Do we have any students of history here? Any Roman history nerds? Okay, so those of you who are familiar with Roman history, we know exactly what happens when a republic weaponizes its justice system to persecute political opponents. It's literally what ended the Roman Republic. So I'm sure some of you remember that last year Elon Musk had tweeted the prescriptions of Marius led to the prescriptions of Sulla. And it was, I think, right after Trump was found guilty in the New York case, the New York trial. And for those of you who don't know, Marius and Sulla were two rivals during the Roman Republic. Both of them were generals. They fought a civil war. And initially Marius and his forces were victorious, and they created what were known as prescription lists, where essentially they would make a list of known supporters of Sulla, and they would arrest them, execute them, seize their property, and redistribute that property to their friends. So Marius did it first, and then there was a change of fortunes in the conflict, and Sulla ended up defeating Marius, and he did the exact same thing. Interestingly enough, there was a young man named Julius Caesar who was also on Sulla's prescription list, and thankfully for him, I can't remember the details. I think it was maybe his aunt. Somebody persuaded Sulla to remove Julius Caesar from his prescription list. But anyway, we only have to look at history to see what happens to a republic when you allow its democratic institutions or its republican institutions to be weaponized. So what do we do? How do we ensure this does not happen again? Thomas Jefferson said, "Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty." Another thing that was dismaying to me was how few of our elected officials, Republicans or Democrats, did absolutely nothing when we're all witnessing the weaponization of our justice system. Even Republicans in safe districts. Doesn't matter who runs against them, they're gonna get elected every election cycle, right? People in safe districts were still cowards and would not stand up for what was right and would not call out the injustice that we all witnessed. Congress in particular, I think, is more so to blame for not doing anything, because they have sweeping powers granted to them by the Constitution, including the ability to, they control the purse strings, and they also have the ability to impeach judges. Again, Congress did nothing. We have civic responsibilities as citizens of a republic. We must stay active, we must stay engaged, and we must hold our elected officials accountable. We must demand that they fulfill their oaths of office to support and defend our Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. President Garfield said, "Now more than ever before, the people are responsible for the character of their Congress. If that body be ignorant, reckless, and corrupt, it's because the people tolerate ignorance, recklessness, and corruption. If it be intelligent, brave, and pure, it is because the people demand these high qualities to represent them in the national legislature." Not only is that true of our Congress, but it's also true of our state legislatures. Our state legislatures have a significant role to play in protecting the citizens of their states from federal overreach by exercising their 10th Amendment rights and acting like the sovereign states that they are. James Madison wrote, "It is the duty of the state legislature to interpose for arresting the progress of evil and for maintaining within their respective limits the authorities, rights, and liberties appertaining to them." We've got to keep our elected officials accountable. And as libertarians, I think we understand the importance of that. And I think that the work that you guys do is crucial. I think that when it comes to civil liberties abuses, the Libertarian Party is probably the best party out there that is concerned about these things, fighting to make sure that people receive due process. It's unfortunate that I think people in both the Republican and Democratic Party are not nearly as concerned with those types of issues as they should be. So I appreciate the work that you guys do. But I do want to leave you guys with just a couple of final thoughts, and then I would be happy to take some questions if you have questions, or if you need to get out of here, by all means, please feel free to do so. But the final thought that I wanted to leave you with is the closing line to the Declaration of Independence says, "We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." What are you willing to sacrifice for the preservation of liberty? For your children, for your grandchildren, maybe your great-grandchildren? President Reagan reminded us that freedom is only ever one generation away from extinction. We must ensure that liberty prevails. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions if anybody wants to ask a question.
I have a question.
The yellow shirt first.